बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। डॉक्टर कामरान आपकी खिदमत में हाज़िर है। मैं इस वक्त लाइडन की एक मस्जिद में मौजूद हूँ और मेरे साथ इस वक्त एक ऐसी शख्सियत मौजूद है जिसको आप बड़ी अच्छी तरह से जानते हैं। इनका नाम जोराम van क्लावरन है और इनका ताल्लुक़ जो आयरलैंड की फ्रीडम पार्टी है उससे था और ये इस्लाम के लिए बड़े जो है वो सख्त गिर मौक़िफ़ रखते थे और इन्होंने एक बुक लिखनी शुरू की जिसका मकसद जो है वो इस्लाम की बहुत सी बुरी चीज़ें निकाल के हाईलाइट करके उसको मज़ीद बदनाम करना था। लेकिन इस प्रोसेस के दौरान वो इस्लामी तालीमात से इस हद तक मुतासर हुए कि उन्होंने इस्लाम कबूल कर लिया। तो आइए सुनते हैं उनकी कहानी उनकी ज़ुबानी।
Well, I looked at Islam as a bad religion, as a religion that well, if you are raised in the Christian theology of my church, you see other religions as wayward and wrong, and especially Islam because there are a lot of similarities. But of course, there's Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that is a big difference with Christianity. And they say, well, after Christ, when you look at it from the perspective of Christianity, there will be no other prophet. But of course, Islam knows another prophet. So, in most of the Protestant Christian theology, they say, well, Prophet Muhammad was an imposter. So that's how I looked at Islam back then. Because it was so anti-Islam. The main reason for me to get involved with the Freedom Party had to do with the economic policy of my old party. I was thinking they were raising taxes and stuff like that, and I'm not. I didn't like that. And of course, the anti-Islam rhetoric of Geert Wilders. It was something that appealed to me because I also felt very bad about Islam, and I was looking at other parties and like, well, what is the baddest? What's the party that's the strongest? Have the strongest policy against Islam? Well, it was the Freedom Party, so that's why I joined them. Well, it was a long-held desire to write an anti-Islam book, and I wanted to write it while I was still in the party back then. But it was not possible because of time and because the policy was that Geert Wilders wrote the books, not the people after Geert. But I wanted to do so, but it was impossible. But when I left the party, I finally had the time to write my anti-Islam book, and I wanted to have good theoretical groundings. When you looked at the things we said in Parliament as the Freedom Party, I said, well, we have to have a good theoretical book that shows why we are right. But while writing the book, I came across so much information. It was at odds with the things I thought were true about Islam. And that started changing my views about Islam. And especially because I was, as we told in the beginning, I was raised in a very Christian Orthodox theology. We were baptized, for example. We read the Bible before eating. We had to pray, went to church, stuff like that. But I had always had questions about, for example, the Trinity. God in Christianity exists out of three persons, but he is one in essence, but three persons. Well, I couldn't cope with that concept. The fact that you have original sin. In Christianity, they believe that all babies, for example, are born as sinners. And another example that I was very much struggling with was the idea that Christ had to die for the sins of people. So God is not able to forgive in Christianity before Jesus Christ died on the cross. Well, and I thought it was strange because in the Old Testament, part 1 of the Bible, we read that God is almighty and he forgives who he wants. So I thought, well, it can't be both true. So there were questions I had as a young boy, but I forgot about it and I got into politics and I didn't bother about theology anymore. But when I was writing my anti-Islam book, those questions popped up again, of course, because I was reading about theology. And I had a lot of Christian questions, but at a certain point I got Islamic answers to my Christian questions, and that started to change my views about Islam. It wasn't so much about the topics I mentioned. That was about the character of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because I learned to see him as a crook, as a bad man, as a terrorist, as someone who killed and slaughtered everybody he met except the people who supported him. But at one time I came across the story of Hind. And of course, she was a person who paid someone to kill his uncle, and he was mutilated, nose cut off, ears. Very horrible things happened to the man. Uh, and of course, the prophet was very sad about that, and he didn't feel happy about things happening like that. But when he got into power, he met her again, and I was reading a book, and I thought, okay, well, where's the passage that he kills her? But he didn't, and he forgave her. And I thought, well, that's not my view of the prophet. I thought, well, he should kill her, but he didn't. And at a certain point, she became even a Muslim as well. So that was the first thing that changed my views about the prophet, and of course Islam as well. So I tried to write down in the book what my arguments were, what I found, and why I think there is a God. After that, of course, I started with the concept of God in Christianity, then the concept of God in Islam, the person of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And I tried in a systematic way to clear my own view, but also the view of Christianity towards Islam and the other way around. And in the end, I was, like we already said, I got so many Islamic answers to my Christian questions that I could no longer deny that there was any truth in Islam. At that time, I didn't convert yet because I had a big problem, of course, because that's the way I was raised in a theological sense, with the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. And after studying his life and studying the things he said, and especially place it in the historical context of those days, it clarified so much to me that I could no longer say he is not a prophet and, for example, Moses is, because I compared Moses to Muhammad, for example. And I thought, well, if I accept Moses as one of the prophets with certain arguments, and those arguments are the same arguments for Prophet Muhammad, I cannot say he's not a prophet. And I read a lot of beautiful stories about him, the content of his character, how enlightened it was when you compared it to other prophets. And at one point I said, well, he's a prophet as well. And then someone said to me, well, if you already believe in one God, because I always did believe in one God, and you accept him as a prophet, you de facto are a Muslim. But I didn't want that to be, because I was in an environment of a lot of people who hated Islam. So there was a struggle. Well, the whole process, because a lot of people think, well, one day he was at the lab of Geert Wilders, and the other day he rolled into a mosque. Well, that's not what happened. It took about everything together. I think it took about 4 years, maybe longer. And when it comes to the personal environment of my own life, yeah, of course, I started telling people that my views changed. And my wife said, well, I saw already that you were changing your views, because when I started writing the book, there was a book at my table. It was called Endgame, and it was about the war between Islam and the West. And it ended up with Islam, the misunderstood religion. So she said, well, I just looked at your books at the table, and it was changing. So at one time she said, I already knew that you were about to become a Muslim, or that your views about Islam were really changing. But of course, there were a lot of people in my environment as well who didn't like the fact that I became Muslim, and one of them was my mother, and she was very sad because, of course, when you try to be in her position, she raised you with her truth, and she raised you in a certain tradition and a certain cultural context. And if your child, no matter if he's a Muslim or a Christian, whatever, if he says, well, I think it's something else, I think you were wrong, yeah, that's something that's painful, of course. And she's still a Christian, so she believes that what I did is something bad for my soul. Of course, I don't believe that, and I think maybe in the future she'll change her views about Islam. Inshallah, but we don't know that. But that made it very hard, because yeah, a lot of people in my family didn't like the fact that I became Muslim. Only my older brother was always very positive. He was the only one that always said, "Well, go on with it." I think it differs from context to context. But when you look at Europe, for example, Of course, the terrorist attacks. That a lot of people don't know religion in general anymore. We just talked about it a few minutes about atheism. A lot of people in the West are secular, but not only secular when it comes to the state, but secular in their personal life as well. So they don't know the concept of religion. They cannot grasp the fact that people believe in God anymore. And I think that's something because they are, in a religious sense, illiterate. They don't know religion anymore, and especially when it comes to Islam, in historical sense, it always has always been the enemy, because you had the Ottoman Empire, of course, a few centuries ago, and the Ottoman Empire was, like all empires, very strong, very big, but it also invaded other countries.
Yeah.
And the countries in Eastern Europe are traumatized, I think, by the fact that they once were invaded by the Ottoman Empire, and that makes, in the cultural sense, make them scared of Islam, because well, they once had the big brother took our countries, so they always have something of maybe Turkey is danger, maybe Islam is a danger, and that's something that's in the European culture. Just like the other way around, I can imagine if I was living in the Middle East, for example, or in Turkey. Well, Europeans have invaded countries, of course. They have slaughtered people. So both parties did a lot of things. Yeah, yeah. But I think and I think that's one of the reasons that in a cultural sense, a lot of Europeans are anti, and the combination with the terrorist attacks, and I think the fact that a lot of people are secular in the West and they don't know their own religion, because a lot of people are not Christian, although a lot of people outside of Europe think that Europeans are Christian. A lot of people are not Christian here. The combination of those factors makes it very hard for people to see something positive in religion, and especially when it comes to Islam, because the only thing they see is terrorist attacks, and the only thing they see is screaming people, or, for example, you have Geert Wilders, of course. He says a lot of crazy things, and he gets death threats. And people, the only thing we see, death threats, and people think, why are they threatening him because of a drawing or a cartoon? It's something in the West people cannot understand, and the combination of all those factors makes it, for Islam in general, very hard to show the true face of Islam, because it's always blurred by a lot of factors. When you look at the world, there are a lot of Muslim scientists, there are a lot of inventions done by Muslims, a lot of charity is done by Muslims. There is so much goodness in Islam that's not shown to the world, and I think if we can show that to the people, it will be a blessing. I founded an organization, it's called the Anthony Janssen Association, and what we want to do is try to change the view that a lot of people have about Islam. We want to do some charity, education, and stuff like that. So, and alhamdulillah, it will. It's starting to work out, and inshallah, it will be working out even better in the future. So that's very fine and nice to do. Of course, yeah. Of course, it is insulting. That's one thing. Of course, I'm a Muslim now, but even when I was not a Muslim, I could imagine that it was insulting. But it's a policy of a lot of anti-Islamic parties to fuel the rage. What they do is, well, we know this and this and this will cause emotional reactions. Let's do that, because a lot of people at home in the West will look at the television. They see a lot of people rioting, burning stuff, screaming. They say, "Look at Muslims. They're emotional. They're wacko. They're not normal people. They're barbarians." So that it's a tactic. So I would say, don't fall for it. The best reaction is, I think, the reaction of our example, and that's Prophet Muhammad. There's peace be upon him. There's a good article. And it was written by an American Muslim, Omar Suleiman, and he wrote an article. It's called "How the Prophet Rose Above Enmity and Insult," and he showed, I think, over 100 examples how the Prophet Muhammad was able to react in a very, almost heavenly way to people. Because he said when people insulted him, he didn't start screaming, he didn't become aggressive, he didn't do anything. He just pointed to the people who were screaming. So you are the barbarian, you are the person who is wrong, you are acting like a wild man. And I think that's the best. Of course, it's very hard because it's an emotional subject, but it's the best way because on the one hand, you take away the weapons of the people who try to make you scream and to provoke you. And on the other way, I think the true example of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is to act like with dignity. Don't start screaming or yelling. And I think that's the best way. But it's of course it's very hard. The difference between my life before Islam and my life after Islam, the main difference for me is that I'm more at peace with myself. Because when I was still a Christian, my head and my heart didn't resonate because the things I felt in my heart were something different from the things I learned in Christian Bible school. But now, at one point, when I finished the book, my anti-Islam book that became a pro-Islam book, it resonated. So when I accepted Islam, the unrest that I felt was gone. So that's the main thing in myself, in a spiritual sense. Yeah, of course, you go to pray, you meet Muslims, you go to a mosque and stuff like that, trying to learn Arabic. So that's those are the differences. And in a bigger picture, when you look at society, yeah, of course, there are a lot of people who don't like you anymore. But on the other way, a lot of people do like me now. So that changed. And something that's not always fun, of course, are death threats and stuff like that. But that's part of the deal, I think, unfortunately.
So did you get any threat? I mean,
a lot, a lot. Especially on social media, Twitter, stuff like that. People say very, very bad things. But in a sense, it's my own fault because I fueled a lot of anger through the years. So it's a little bit that goes around, comes around. And of course, I know in a religious sense, they say, well, you start over again, and that's very very fine, of course. And I'm very happy that it is when it comes to the Creator. But in a social sense, that's not the case, of course, because a lot of people say, well, you said that back then, you said this, you said that. So they use my own words, especially people from my old party and people who vote for the party against me, and they say, well, you have to die and stuff like that. And that's of course not nice. But yeah, well, it's not the worst thing in my life. Yeah. Well, I'm cured when it comes to politics, but we are trying to found an organization, to start a foundation that will not be in politics, but more like a lobby group. Because in a lot of other countries, especially in Western countries, you have lobby groups lobby groups for people who have workers' organizations or are in, for example, for farmers, for Jewish people, Christian people, whatever group. But the only group that has not have such a lobby group are Muslims. And I think it's very necessary for us to have such a group. So that's why we are talking now with a few people to start building an organization like that, and then we'll be back in politics, but not as a politician, but the other way, the other side of the table. Yeah, of course, it would be very nice if people read the book. It's called Apostate, and it's originally was written in Dutch. Now it's translated into English, and inshallah it will be translated into Urdu as well. And it's about the misconceptions about Islam, and especially from a perspective from a non-Muslim and ending up as a Muslim. So you see all the arguments against Islam when it comes to the age of Aisha, for example, when it comes to terrorism, the position of women, Jewish people, Christian people. So all the main arguments most of the time are used against Islam in the West, and maybe in Pakistan or India or countries in that area as well, are in the book. And I try to explain what I found out in a historical sense, that most of the things we see now, the bad things, has nothing to do with the religion. It's most of the part culture, and most of the time it's geopolitical stuff. So I think that the religion is marvelous, and I hope a lot of people will get to know Islam.
Thank you very much.